Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail C. Martin, and tonight we're going to talk about favorite pit stops, those locations on the show that we'd love to revisit, we'd love to see more of, and we'd love to explore in a little more detail. But first, let me have our other panelists introduce themselves. Keith?
Hi, I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido. I've written a ridiculous amount of fiction. Some of it is in my own original universes, fantastical police procedurals in the fictional cities of Cliff's End and Super City, urban fantasies in the somewhat real locales of Key West and New York City. I have also written a metric buttload of not of supernatural books, a metric buttload of media tie-in fiction, including some supernatural novels. I've written for books based on TV shows, movies, comics, games, Alien, Star Trek, Zorro, Sleepy Hollow, Orphan Black, Farscape, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Doctor Who, and yes, Supernatural, including these three books. Ta-da! Oh, yeah, in front of the camera. Nevermore, Bone Key, and Heart of the Dragon, which were three of the first four novels that came out for Supernatural that took place during the early part of the show, which is why they look so young on the cover. And I've also done some other stuff for Supernatural, the introduction to the Smart Pop essay collection In the Hunt, and I wrote the text for the John Winchester journal that Inside Editions put out. It was just a little excerpt from John Winchester's journal that goes at the front of what is otherwise a blank journal. Inside Edition has a whole bunch of those, and there's always reviews on Amazon that's saying, hey, it's just a blank journal, and that's what it's supposed to be. But neither here nor there. Anyway, I've been a fan of the show since the very beginning, and have been continuing to watch the show, including doing some panels with Gail for Dragon Con's Urban Fantasy track, talking about the last season. So that's me.
So, Electra.
I'm Electra Hammond. I'm a writer and a copy editor. I got a couple of stories out. You can find, I think, the latest one I've written in Alternate Peace, edited by Joshua Parmentier and Stephen Silver.
Cool. And I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, near future, post-apocalyptic, and more. And as Morgan Bryce, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. Pretty much all of them are worlds that Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home with a little bit of salt. So, if you had to pick your number one favorite location on Supernatural over the years, what would it be? Keith?
I think the Impala is cheating, so I won't say that.
It already got its own episode.
Yeah, it's true. Probably, honestly, I thought they really missed an opportunity with Harvell's Roadhouse.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a really good opportunity for a sort of local, a central place for hunters to gather, and gossip over drinks and other stuff. And it seemed like that's where they were going with it, but then they pretty much abandoned it by the end of the second season when they just blew it up. I would have liked to have seen more of that. I think it had a really good opportunity to be a cool thing in the show that they didn't really make enough use of, I don't think.
Yeah, I always figured they wanted that sense of isolation for the boys, like they really, were cut off from everybody. But I agree, I would have loved to have seen more of Harvell's. Even if they'd have just given us more of it before they burned it down or blew it up.
Yeah.
How about you, Electra?
I think I would have said the bunker up until the very last season. I am now fascinated by Death's Library. I just can't get past the idea that there's a spotlessly clean, endless library that Death keeps all of the records in. And it blows me away every time they go there, entering, of course, in the W's.
Mm-hmm. And messing it up as they do.
Well, yeah, but every time they come back, it's been cleaned.
It just warms the cockles of an OCD heart, right?
Well, or somebody that has a very large library. It's very well organized.
Yeah. The bunkers is certainly a top one for me, just because in some ways it almost seemed like the TARDIS. You need a room to do this, we have it. You need a dungeon, we have that. You need a shooting range, we have that. I wondered how
long did they live there before they found the dungeon?
Yeah, at least a season.
Yeah.
But I kept wondering, are they going out, horizontally? Is this below ground level, but all on one level? Or I don't see them going up and down stairs except to get in and out of the main room. But dang, that goes under a whole lot of Lebanon, Kansas, if they're going horizontally. Maybe it's a mine shaft, so I just thought that was the amazing. It had all kinds of rooms of requirement.
Well, I mean, that it had to take over the role from Bobby's house. So after Bobby died, and it was a good. I understand why they did it, because it was becoming less and less convincing that these guys with no actual monetary resources could continue doing what they were doing.
Well, they had a magic credit card by that point.
Yeah.
But still, yeah, they really needed a place to keep the books and the stuff.
Yeah, and just somewhere, where they could settle down. It was always it always bugged me that they were able to, continue driving around the country in a car that gets, 4 feet to the gallon. And when the show first went on the air, gas was $4 a gallon. It was just, come on, guys. But the bunker at least papered over that to some extent. Plus, I loved the mid-century design.
Mm-hmm.
The place was I mean, it had been abandoned, in the 50s, and it obviously hadn't been changed. And I just love the way the set designers did such a good job with the design aesthetic of that, of making it look like a 1950s bunker. With the furniture and all the stuff on the wall, and the funky old-fashioned computers and the doors. All of it was just perfect mid 20th century stuff. I loved it.
I always figured that they needed the bunker because once you get past 30, sleeping on the back seat of a car or on a really crappy motel bed makes it very hard to get up in the morning and fight monsters.
Well, that is a good point.
Where do I back on hitches?
Yeah.
It doesn't work the same.
Well, and also just having their own kitchen, and because living on fast food, once you start to get a little older, gets old.
Even if you're burning it off, fighting monsters, it sticks.
Yeah.
Well, and at one point, the Leviathans owned like every fast food chain around, so
right. Yeah.
For them to go out to eat.
I can imagine at this point eating fast food, they get PTSD from it at this point. So
I would love to have seen them investigate some of those other Men of Letters bunkers a little more. They went to the one where Abaddon had killed everybody, and I forget which city that was in, but it set the precedent that there were obviously other bunkers elsewhere. And I always wondered, well, did they go back and clean that one out and get all the books and all the secrets out of it? I mean, why would you just leave it there? So
yeah, the whole Men of Letters thing just never entirely clicked for me. It felt like it was them. It never felt like it was thought through very well, which was true of a lot of the one of the frustrations with the show. A lot of times is they didn't always think everything through. Especially once they brought in the British Men of Letters, that just, a lot of that just didn't hold up. And yeah, they should, because they should have been raiding all the other ones for resources too, if they were also equally abandoned. So
I'm just now picturing the Impala with a U-Haul behind it as they loot all these other abandoned bunkers.
Oh.
But you mentioned Bobby's house. We really only ever saw his panic room and like the kitchen and the living room.
Yeah.
Did we ever see any other rooms? Did they all sleep in the living room? Did it have an attic?
There was a staircase upstairs. I'm assuming that's where the bedrooms were. And I'm sure there was the master bedroom, and I'm sure there's at least one other bedroom up there.
There certainly is in fan fiction, but I mean in the actual show.
But I mean, but there was a staircase upstairs, and so that presumably was where Bobby, at least, and probably where the boys also slept. And then the stuff downstairs. It doesn't look like it's that big a house anyway. But it looks exactly like what you'd expect a house that doubled as a small business to look like, you know. And that was one of the things I always liked about Bobby's, was that he also had a thriving business as well, and one that would, you know, enable him, you know, because the question of where people get their money is one that is always one that fiction tends to gloss over very often. But, you know, one of the things I liked about what they established about Bobby was that he ran a junkyard, you know, and that's as long as there are cars, he'll be able to stay in business. It also was a good way to explain how Dean was able to keep the Impala in such good shape. But,
I always figured there had to be at least, even in a small house, there probably would have been a fourth room downstairs. And in my mind, I always figured that was another book room for Bob.
oh yeah, I assume he had used, like, all the spare rooms became libraries.
Right. The heart of that room was always the kitchen, where they were sitting around the kitchen table.
Yeah.
Always.
Or at his desk in the living room. Yeah.
With the couch. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they just never found a reason to show us the other rooms.
Yeah.
And then he had that massive basement with the panic room because he had a weekend off.
Right. Yeah. And one of my favorite scenes I wrote at the beginning of Bone Key was Dean, Sam, and Bobby sitting around in the living room of Bobby's house watching New Year's Rockin' Eve on television to watch the ball drop, which I just thought was you know, the sort of thing they would have done, you know, if they were actually not out hunting something on New Year's Eve. They would have been with Bobby doing that, with mostly with Dean bitching about how Ryan Seacrest was not worthy to succeed Dick Clark. But
yeah, this is true. And how some of his co-hosts just possibly might have also been possessed, and maybe they should run up there with some salt. Not mentioning any names, but you all know who I mean.
Yes.
How about you, Elektra?
I've lost. There was another bar somewhere in the middle where Dean went down there chasing a case and ran into an old friend that had been a hunter.
The one with Lee, the one where they sang from the Dukes of Hazzard one. Yeah.
No, the oh God, the guy that was on oh Lord, another series Keith writes in.
Oh, Christian Kane's character. Christian Kane?
Yes.
Yeah, that was the one where they sang the song from Dukes of Hazzard up on the stage. And Christian Kane had that monster in the basement. Yeah.
Yes. Well, he had something in the basement. Yes.
Yes, indeed.
But just the idea that a hunter could retire and buy a bar, and thinking that was a great thing to do, because they kept trying the retirement thing and it didn't work out for them.
Well, and when Michael trapped Dean in his mind, he was running Rocky's bar, and you know, which was chock full of memorabilia from past episodes and family business brewing beers, and that really weird monkey statue that's been in like every season, and a stuffed moose. But yeah, it kind of always goes back to Dean's either running a bar or he's a mechanic if he's not hunting. Yeah. The one I wish we could have seen more, and again, they should have gone back and looted it, was Cuthbert Sinclair's secret lair. The one where it was, you know, kind of had that secret entrance, again, man of letters, but where Dean ended up, the whole thing with the first blade and Abaddon. But again, this guy had a whole cryptid zoo, and he had all these pilfered relics, and I would have loved to have poked around there, and we really just saw his study.
They just don't. They seem to just let things go.
Well, I mean, it's one of those where in a book you're under more pressure, I think, to not leave as many loose ends in your wake. But in a series, you're on to the next piece of the arc. So if it doesn't fit, you just move on.
one of the things, and one of the things that I've enjoyed about the show, excuse me, Steve has been sitting there for like 5 minutes. Is that, I mean, part of the thing of the show is that they don't stay in one place, and which is why I think the idea of the bunker became appealing after a while, just because it gave them some sort of home base to use. And Bobby's house really in a lot of ways became the same thing. But part of the appeal of the show is they keep going. They're always on the road. They're always going somewhere new. They're always going to a new spot. Their only real home base is Baby. And it makes, and plus, of course, there's the perpetual problem with Supernatural, which is that they drive all over the country and everywhere they go looks just like Vancouver. And the show
all
has
the
never
little
been
towns that look the same.
Yes. And we constantly are going back to, that lake that they're always near, or that mountain they're always near, or that clearing that they're always near. Just recycling the British Columbian locations. But that's, a big part of the appeal of the show is that they do go all over the place. It seems like they go into the same diner every damn time. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
my favorite of the diners will always be, because it was the episode that introduced Adam, was Cousin Oliver's.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they went out and said, look, yes, we're introducing the stupid younger brother that we've never heard before. We're going to call it Cousin Oliver's. So we know what we're doing, and we're doing it anyway, which I appreciate.
Well, they made a big deal of that. Oh, God. In one of the episodes with Castiel, he went from Biggersons to Biggersons to Biggersons, and the angels couldn't chase him because they all looked the same.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept showing him in the same place with different views, and they just flashed different locations on it. They know that their locations all look the same. And towards the end, they just started to make a joke out of it.
But there's a lot of places that do that. I mean, every Starbucks you walk into looks like every other Starbucks you walk into, and that's by design. They want it to all look the same.
Well, every Walmart too.
Yeah.
Well, and my dad didn't particularly like to drive on interstate highways, so we drove a lot of secondary routes. And you know what? They might not have been Route 66, but they had a lot of interchangeable greasy spoon diners and mom and pop hotels that were all on one floor with the quintessential metal chair out in front, 1950s design, usually red. And, so I look at some of those and go, there was a big swath of America secondary highways that did look like this for a long time.
Well, and those were the sort of places, when you went to that kind of place, that was the sort of place where you could talk to the owner and you could just give them cash. Whereas if you go to Motel 6 or the Econo Lodge, they want a credit card and your driver's license.
Yeah.
And there's I lost my train of thought. There is a certain, you're right. There's a certain sameness. There's even a certain sameness to, stuff you find off the interstate now. It's usually, all the rest stops look like all the other rest stops. Or, all the gas stations have these shops in them where you can buy the same stuff you can buy in all the other gas stations. And there's a certain repetitiveness to it. I'm also reminded, I'm thinking of the episode that was their attempt to do the vampire spinoff when they went to Chicago. And how jarring it was, because they actually did go to Chicago and do some second unit shooting there. And it's like, whoa, okay, this is a place that actually looks unique. Because, the one thing the show's never been able to do is really embrace the location, which is why they keep going to small towns all the time. Because like we were talking about, the small towns all look the same in a lot of ways.
They spend all their money on music.
Yeah. And so, when you go somewhere like Chicago, which is very distinctive, or, then it jumps out at you. And it also jumps out at you when they say they're going somewhere like St. Louis or Baltimore, and it doesn't look anything like St. Louis or Baltimore. And it's too bad in some ways, because there's so many cities that have such wonderful lore in them. hell, a hunter could go to New Orleans and never leave because they'd be hunting the entire freaking time they're there. You know, New York, San Francisco, Key West, these are all places that have tons of ghost lore and tons of spooky stuff that could keep a hunter busy forever, but they can't go there because there's no way you're going to make Vancouver look like Key West. There's certainly no way you're going to make it look like New Orleans.
There are ways that you can, there's a show that set on the Maryland shore that shoots in Vancouver. And they do it all with location shots in Baltimore. And then they do some clever shots. They do clever shooting in Vancouver. And they actually do a pretty decent job of just interspersing them. And they could have done something like that. I remember thinking for years that the Highlander show was actually set in New York, because the damn 2-part pilot was shot in New York, and you saw all those iconic locations, and then they moved it up to Vancouver.
Well, that's like in a lot of the promo shots for the first season of Supernatural. They're out in the desert. There are cactuses. And you're going, where was this? And they apparently shot all that first season promo near LA, and you know, so they were in the desert, but then they never came back. But that can definitely throw you off, because I was just watching something and it was supposed to be set in upstate New York, but there was this spooky scene in a cemetery, and it had all this, you know, spooky atmosphere. And there were suddenly live oak trees dripping with Spanish moss.
Yeah, you don't have that in upstate New York.
No.
I lived there for 25 years. No.
Yeah. So, and I told Larry, I said, back that up. Wait, there was Spanish moss, and this is supposed to be New York. So at least they didn't. They did make
spooky cemeteries up there.
Yeah. Yeah. They did make some jokes about the weather being positively Canadian.
Right. Yeah, God, and certainly the overcast, rainy atmosphere helped the look of the show. Mm-hmm. But
well, one of the other diners we saw a lot of was the one in Mystery Spot with the pig and the poke.
Right.
So we got to see a lot of that diner, which kind of leads me to the interior of all of those amazing hotel rooms.
Yeah, there was some really delightfully tacky places they stayed.
What were some of your favorites? The ones that immediately come to mind?
There was one motel set that they used a lot, where there was always this sort of hideous 1970s grate that was in the middle of the room, just sort of. That was sort of subdividing the room to make it give the illusion that there were more rooms in it than there really were. And it was so 1970s and so hideous. And they kept using it over and over again.
But they also changed out what the elements were in it, because I remember there was one that it was all like trout, because they were someplace where you could go fishing. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I blanked out all the bad motel rooms. I've stayed in too many bad motels. And I would just look and say, oh God, they're in another cheap motel.
There was one episode I just rewatched, and it was one of the early seasons, and the wallpaper was all black and white with shiny patches of silver, and the accent lighting actually was disco balls. And you're thinking, okay, guys, did you get the hotel next to the, stripper joint? Maybe, but this was really a no-tell motel.
It was right next to the Four Seasons Landscape Company.
Yes.
I also remember there was a period there, I think it was in season 3, 4, thereabouts, where they suddenly were squatting in abandoned houses a lot. They abandoned that in pretty short order. And I'm not sure what brought that on or why they thought that was a good idea. Or maybe, they got a brief moment where they decided, hey, let's be realistic about this. But either that or they got a good deal on, abandoned building sets. That stood out for me just because it was something different, and it was something that was a lot more hard scrabble than even they usually did.
Yeah, but that doesn't hold together with the fact that they always looked so clean and put together.
Whenever they certainly when they put on their FBI suits that they somehow manage to get pressed all the time. Yeah.
Even their regular clothes, they look very clean and put together. I mean, it's like Robin Hood with tights that don't have any runs in them. It looks wrong.
Well, I mean, I guess the idea is that those mom and pop motels have a laundry room somewhere.
Oh.
Yeah, where you can have your suit pressed.
Well, that was one thing we only really got to see the boys in the laundromat once and Cass in the laundromat once, you know, stripped down to his skivvies doing his laundry.
Yes.
And you could just imagine that there were so many other times when you got anything left that isn't bloody? No, you know, 3 a.m. in the laundromat with all of their clothing covered with blood. Nobody would suspect a thing.
No. Honestly, most big city laundromats, particularly the 24-hour ones, they don't care.
Well, yeah, but blood's really hard to get out. I was assuming they were just buying new clothes because blood's really hard to get out.
Yeah.
And they were just hitting the Army Navy store and picking up new stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, thrift shops. I think one of my other favorite hotel rooms was the one in, I think it was Frontierland, where it had the Western theme and all the cowboy pictures on the wall. And Dean was totally geeking out and he knew who everybody was. And I think it had Longhorn Steer and even Sam and Cass just had to look at each, and no, it couldn't have been Frontierland. It was later than that because Jack was with them. They all just looked and just shook their head like, let him go, just let him run.
Forget it, he's rolling. Yeah.
One of the other things that always strikes me, though, about those hotel rooms is they always just say they're a hotel room. They never say they're moving into like an extended stay suite, but those are the biggest friggin' hotel rooms in the world.
That's television. You got to be able to fit, you know, the camera, the lights, the dolly grip, and all that other stuff into the set. You know, I've long since given that up. Complaining about that just because it's the realities of television. It's why you'll never see a New York apartment that actually is the size of a New York apartment on television because you can't fit a camera crew in there.
I was going to say, a New York hotel room, you have to crawl over the bed to get to the bathroom. There is no room for a fist fight in the middle of the floor.
Nope. I've been to hotel rooms in New York where you have to, climb over the bed in order to get to the front door or to the bathroom or to the closet. It's just,
That's very European, actually.
Also.
Mm-hmm.
The European ones are worse.
Yeah, but at least the European ones have a bidet.
True.
Yeah.
Now, some of the other places that they visited some of the asylums, some of the old haunted houses, any of those particularly stick in your mind?
Well, only that they did institutional really, really well. You know, they have gray walls down to a science. We have lost Gail. There she is.
No, I'm back.
That was worrisome.
She temporarily blinked out of existence. She's fine.
Yeah. Also, the prison they did when they got themselves sentenced to jail for a bit, so they could take care of the problem in the prison. They did prison. I think they actually shot that in a prison.
It
certainly looked like one, or an ex-prison.
Yeah. Well,
real prisons have real inmates, and that's an issue. But there are plenty of ex-prisons around.
Well, and I was just thinking Waverly Hills Sanitarium, where they scooped up all the souls to make Dean's soul bomb, and Roosevelt Asylum in the asylum episode where Sam, gets ghost possessed. Now, Roosevelt Asylum didn't exist, but Waverly Hills is pretty famous and does ghost tours. Obviously, they didn't go there and shoot on site, but it was indeed a real location.
I'm assuming that the Roosevelt Asylum was a play on the fact that Roosevelt Island in New York used to house an asylum. That was what was originally there. So.
When I looked into it, I think that is where the reference came from, although it was supposed to be outside of Rockville, Illinois.
Oh yeah, no, I know. I just thought they were being cute with the name.
Well, some of those big old houses where you had some of the hauntings, like in the early seasons, the episode with all the dolls, and in the later seasons there was one where Bobby was a ghost already, and they ran into Annie and all the Victorian ghosts. But I'm not sure what you call that style of house, whether it's a kind of a craftsman, or there was just some really gorgeous locations that they used, and those were fun to look at and think, wow, what else is there?
House there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because certainly some of them, at least the exterior shots were real, and I do wonder if they really could have rigged up some of those interior shots, or if they did shoot for real inside.
I don't know.
Well, remember the Brady house inside now.
What else?
Were not the same. So
no,
probably sets somewhere.
Yeah.
Probably sets. Yeah.
They ruined all of my.
There was one look. The halfway house where Dean was for like 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
They did the flashbacks too. That was a cool. I like that. I thought that was an interesting location and an interesting little bit of Dean's backstory there.
Mm-hmm.
Was that he lived at this one? He was actually in that one place for that long a time.
I thought that in general they did a lot of regular person Midwest house interiors very realistically.
Yeah.
Middle class, middle American, mid-century or slightly earlier. The post World War II house.
Yeah.
That everybody I knew grew up in.
Yes.
I did find a lot of those to be very realistic.
And they were very consistent about staying in the middle of the country. I was actually doing research for a project that wound up falling through, but part of the research was seeing all the different locations that they went to, and the vast majority of them were in the middle of the country. They very rarely went to a coast. They very rarely they almost never went to the South, which is hilarious considering where the two stars are from. And it was almost entirely Midwestern. They kept coming back to Kansas, to Ohio, to Iowa, to Missouri. The Dakotas. Yeah, well, certainly, yeah.
I think they were doing that just because there's nothing really to distinguish those areas of the country. As soon as you go out to the coast, there's ocean.
For one thing, yeah.
And you have to account for that, and if you get down to Florida and California, if there's no palm trees, it gets really obvious.
Yeah.
Well, and if you've ever been to Vancouver, there aren't a whole lot of cities that have the ocean on one side and the Rockies on the other side. I mean, you kind of know where you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's a lot. That's the one thing that we're never able to recreate is how flat the Midwest is, because Vancouver is quite hilly. But it was but
are they shooting there, or are they shooting up north of Vancouver where things flatten out?
Well, some of it is, yeah. I mean, and they shoot a lot in the suburbs, obviously, because that's where they find all those cool houses. But they were really dedicated to keeping them in the middle of the country as much as humanly possible, which, if nothing else, made it more realistic that they drove everywhere. But
I think that was part of Kripke's intent, though.
Yeah.
Also, part of what weighed into him having them come from Lawrence, Kansas, because it's kind of the geographic center of the continental U.S.
Yeah.
And I think that whole Americana thing, and the Route 66 piece, although, Route 66 certainly went interesting places further west. I would have loved to have seen them at more roadside attractions, because those things gotta be haunted.
Yeah.
All those little museums that people have bought stuff, you go, oh, what made you think that was a good idea? I would have loved to have seen them do more of that. The one that made me laugh for getting it very, very realistic was Plucky Penny Whistles.
Yes.
The one that was the total Chuck E. Cheese knockoff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And having taken 3 kids to so many Chuck E. Cheeses over the years for their birthdays and others, oh man.
Yeah.
And it also didn't surprise me at all that there was probably some psychotic ball washer somewhere in the back room.
Oh yeah. One location that they did a lot with also was Dick's office building, where Charlie worked. That corporate structure, which was incredibly bland and you know, not. There are some offices where you can tell like the people who work there have made it their own, and there are some offices that are complete corporate drone, and this was complete corporate drone, which fit with what the Leviathans were doing anyway.
Which have been scrubbed completely free of any traces of the human soul. I've worked in
Exactly.
those.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm sure we all have at some point. And that was very nicely done. And the symbolism of the Impala crashing into the sign, when Meg crashed the Impala into the sign at the very end when they took Dick out, was perfect. And I thought just the whole use from the glass elevator where Charlie did her Walking on Sunshine dance, to the design of the cubicles, to all of it, was just so wonderfully corporately sterile.
I liked also the office building that they were in when they confronted Michael as Dean, with the whole the fight with Garth, who wolfed out in the end and all that, because it was a definite homage to Nakatomi Plaza in Die Hard. I forget what the knockoff name was. It was something like Herkatomi Place or something. It was definitely Die Hard. And then in these last couple of episodes in season 15, I don't know if you noticed, but one of the apartment buildings was named Kim Manor, as opposed to Kim Manners, and Sammy's Diner. And so many times they've named places after somebody in the cast or crew. And people pick up on that if you're intimately familiar with the name of the cast, the crew.
That actually bit them on the ass with Bobby, because he was originally just supposed to be a one-off character named Bobby, and they threw the sign up that said Singer Salvage Yard as a joke as a tribute to Robert Singer, and then he wound up becoming a recurring character, and they were stuck with the sign.
And he was in, I think, every season at least once after that appearance. Yep. And there's even a line there's even a line in The French Mistake about what kind of a douche names a character after himself.
But it was just, the set designers do love their little in-jokes. And
well, speaking of French Mistake, how about Jared's house?
Oh God, yes.
And Dean's so-called trailer.
Yes.
Yes, Jared's pretend house with all the Andy Warhol style paintings of himself and Jen, and then the alpaca, not to be mistaken for a llama, in the backyard.
Yeah, and that was a perfect send up of a pretentious actor's house.
And it was palatial.
Oh yeah. I'm just wondering where they must have been driving her all over British Columbia trying to find the perfect pretentious house to film that in, or to film the outside. Anyway. I mean, I'm assuming the interiors was a set, but
I don't know. I have been in some of those huge houses where they probably are big enough to have shot something.
Oh no, I'm just thinking in terms of the set decoration. It would have been easier to just build a set of the interior of a mansion, so they could make it as horrendous as they wanted to. As Jared Padalecki's house.
Palatial mansion out there that's a restaurant out in Sydney. That's a really good restaurant. Sorry, there are cat shows out on Sydney Island, so we've been there a couple of times.
Yeah, and of course the Easter egg there was that Jared didn't know Jen had brought their actual wedding picture to put on the mantle until they were filming the scene.
Oh. That's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just trying to think of some of the other ones that really, caught your eye. Because they went to so many places. Frank
the pool hall where they got their luck back.
Yes, that was well done.
Yeah.
They drove to Alaska. That was insane. After all these we drive across a couple of states, when we drive to the Dakotas, they drove across Canada to Alaska.
Yeah.
I kept thinking of just how long is that going to take? That's a really long drive.
Yeah. I had, yeah.
Well, not as long as some of the other drives they've done. I mean, sorry, my computer's making funny noises. I apologize.
You have to drive across Canada to get there.
Well, yeah. But they did all sorts of other drives, sometimes in ridiculously short amounts of time. There's and the number of places that somehow are somehow magically proximate to Sioux Falls all of a sudden. They always treated every drive they did as if it was short, and these are things that would take days. A lot of them, Even if you are starting at the middle of the country, or starting from Sioux Falls, there's a long way to go.
They didn't get traffic tickets either.
No, or they did and they just didn't pay them.
We didn't even get pulled over much, despite the muscle car.
Yeah.
Well, that's like somebody pointed out that when Dean dies at the end of season 10, when Metron stabs him. Anyhow, Sam, to drive him back, the next scene is Sam carrying him into his bedroom at the bunker. That's 800 miles. 800 miles of driving with the dead body in the back seat.
To be fair, the dead body was probably in the trunk, but because otherwise it would stink up the joint.
That's true.
And in fact, supposedly Kripke was told to use an Impala rather than the car he wanted. I think he originally wanted to be a Mustang they drove, and somebody suggested an Impala because you can fit a body in the trunk. which only makes sense.
Yeah.
In the one where there is the Titanic doesn't sink. They're driving a Mustang.
Yeah. Well, and they went through that whole period where they ditched the Impala because of the Leviathans, and then Cass,
it's too damn noticeable.
Cass had that kind of pimp mobile Cadillac.
Yeah.
And there's one place where they've got one of the cars that have the hydraulics that you can go up and down, and they had rented the car, and Jared kind of broke it playing with the hydraulics, because in between scenes he went over and just oops as one does.
Yes. There's another location that was only used when incredibly convenient and necessary to the plot, which was John's storage unit up in Buffalo. Not really clear as to why his storage unit was there of all places, but whatever. I still don't know who was paying for that all these years, but
and Buffalo, I read something about the locations and how many times they returned to certain locations, and Buffalo was in like the top 5. And
wow,
that always makes me wonder, if you've ever really been to Buffalo, why?
Yeah.
Well, given that we have.
Yeah.
It's true.
It was well, you just got to shuffle off there every once in a while. Sorry, but I think it's at least partly because they decided to set the storage unit there, so they had to keep going back there to fetch whatever plot convenient thing they needed that time. So.
And it needed out of the way. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the others that just really sticks in my mind is the Christmas village that they visited in a very supernatural Christmas, with the drunk Santa and the elf who thought they were pervs, and then the pagan gods. with
Yes.
their very nicely decorated suburban house.
Yes, and the bow tie.
Mm-hmm. That was
fun. There's also one location that we should mention because it's kind of important, even though they didn't really go back there very often. Was the house that they lived in when Mary died.
Mm-hmm.
The house in Lawrence that where Azazel basically, killed Mary and which got it all started. That unassuming little house, which they later went back to in the first season, to check back on things with Missouri. That's where it all started.
Mm-hmm.
That's where
Checking back their, time travel.
yeah.
It's an interesting place for them to visit occasionally.
Yeah.
I did always wonder, though, given the ferocity of the fire, how on earth it didn't just burn to the ground.
Mm.
That was a pretty vicious fire,
Yeah.
which looked suspiciously gas fueled. So,
and that one of the most important moments of the show was when John hands 6-month-old Sam to Dean and tells him to get the hell out of the house. Now Dean, go. That's what started the whole show.
Those are Dean's hardwired operating instructions for the rest of his life.
Yes. Yeah. That's his operating software.
All right, folks. Well, we have blown through the better part of an hour talking about all those wonderful places. And I'm sure, as soon as we get off this, we'll think of about 5 others.
Probably.
Because there are so many. But thank you guys so much for spending some of the evening with me and checking out some of those wonderful locations. Take a minute and tell everybody where they can find you online. Elektra?
You can find me on Twitter at Electra and my website is untilmidnight.com.
Awesome. Keith?
What happens at midnight? Never mind. You can find me online at DeCandido.net. That is currently a very primitive link dump. I'm in the process of working with someone to bring it into the 21st century finally. But for now, at least, it'll link you to my Facebook page, my Twitter feed, my blog, my articles for Tor.com, my YouTube channel where I've been reading my short fiction, and a bunch of other things, plus ordering links for my most recent books, as well as links to Amazon and other stuff. That's the place to find me. I'm very easy to find on social media. Like I said, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and again on my blog and on YouTube. So come check me out there and bug me. I could use the company.
Awesome. And I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com and morganbryce.com, and everything on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and in between are some variation of those 2 names. So just put those in and search and you'll find them. Well, thank you again for taking a walk down memory lane on all of those memorable locations. And thank you folks for tuning in and watching us. There'll be a lot more Supernatural coming up soon here on Continual.